Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you, as always. Hope you're having a fabulous Tuesday and a fabulous week so far. Hope you had a good weekend. My husband and I took a post-COVID recovery road trip over the weekend, which was a lot of fun. We took the dogs with us, and we meet so many people because of the dogs. People think they're adorable. They're brother and sister. They're 8, but they're Chihuahuas, so they're little, and we get stopped all the time. People want to talk to the dogs. They don't necessarily want to talk to us. They want to talk to the dogs, which is fine, and we meet a lot of people that way, but it was a lot of fun, and it was nice to just get out after we'd been cooped up for so long. But I've also been having, technology issues lately. Just, my computer is... It's not that old unless you consider technology years, and then it's older than dirt, and so it's giving me a lot of issues. And I actually thought that I had lost this interview that I recorded with today's author. Had a minor heart attack about that. Finally figured it out. Thank goodness, have the interview, giving it to you now. But just that and a lot of other technical issues have been frustrating me. But here we are. We have another episode. Today, my author is Gregory Erich Phillips. The book that we are talking about is A Season in Lights. Let me go ahead and give you the description of that book. In the colorful artistic underworld off Broadway, Cammie, a dancer in her mid-30s, has just landed her first part in a show since coming to New York City. Yet the tug of familial obligation and the guilt of what she sacrificed to be there weigh down her dancing feet. Her lover, Tom, an older piano player, came to the city as a young man in the 1980s with a story eerily in tune with Cammie's own. Through their triumphs and failures, both learn the fleeting nature of glory, the sweetness of new love, and how a dream come true isn't cherished until it passes. The bright lights and the stage intoxicate, while degradation and despair lurk close behind the curtain. Their sagas are married by 2 pandemics, AIDS in the 1980s and COVID-19 today, which ravaged the performing arts community, leaving a permanent scar on those who lived through them. The poignant intersection of their stories reveals a love affair unbound by time, reaching across decades through the notes of a piano's remembered song. So, as you can tell from that introduction, that description, we have Cammie and Tom. We're hearing both of those stories. We're hearing Cammie's in the contemporary settings of the book, that is in 2021, so more recent. We are hearing Tom's from the time that he came to New York, which is in the 1980s. So 2 different people coming to New York at different times, and yet their stories have a lot of parallels and mirrors, and they are together as a couple through parts of this book. And I just noticed, totally random, that this book came out April 12th of 2021. Came out on my birthday last year. Yay. But at any rate, you get these 2 different time periods, and you see the similarities and the differences in Cammie's experiences and Tom's experiences, and what they learn from those experiences, how it affects them in their lives, how their choices affect their lives, etc. So it is definitely a character-driven story as we learn their stories, and I learned a lot about performing and, off Broadway in this case, but just a lot of things that I'd never really thought about. I guess maybe if I'd thought about them, I would have maybe known them, but maybe not. So I learned a lot from their stories about living in New York, which is not something that I ever thought about seriously. I never thought I had the talent or the ability to perform in New York in any capacity, whether that's music or acting or dancing, etc. So maybe one of those sort of pipe dreams. I mean, like really, really far off kind of fantasies, but never in a serious way. So I learned a lot from this book. Let's go ahead and turn to that thankfully not lost interview with Gregory, and he can tell you more about the book. Again, it is called A Season in Lights. The author is Gregory Erich Phillips. Hi, Gregory. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
I am happy to have you here. We are going to talk about your novel, A Season in Lights. Before we get to the book, though, if you would start by sharing a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So my name is Gregory Phillips. I live in Seattle, Washington, and Season in Lights is my third novel, and it just came out last year. So pretty excited about that. I think we'll get into it more, but the novel is kind of plays on some things that I also do in my life. I'm a musician, a dancer, as well as a writer. So I kind of brought all those things together for this book, which was really exciting.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the things I was going to ask you, but we'll get to that. In terms of the book, can you give an overview of the story?
Sure. So it's a story of passion, ambition, and escape set in the colorful artistic underworld off Broadway in New York City. It tells two stories in parallel. One is a contemporary story about a dancer who's just trying to kind of make it in the performing arts in New York. And then there's a concurrent or a story that goes back to the 1980s about a young piano player who came to New York with kind of a similar dream, and their stories intersect in the present day. And one of the things with this novel that I really wanted to do was show sort of the lower level performing arts experience. There's a lot of stories, movies, books, and everything written about making it big on Broadway. And that's not everybody's reality. So I just kind of wanted to show a different glimpse of how that the whole performing arts world and that dream can manifest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get a couple of different viewpoints on that throughout the story with different characters, especially the two main characters. What made you decide to set part of it in 1980? Is it 1986 or 84? Anyway, mid 80s.
So, somewhere around there. Yeah. Well, I felt that was a very interesting time period in, not that I have personal experience of that. I was not there at the time, but a very vibrant, but also in some ways a dark time for New York City and the performing arts world in particular. And one of the reasons, too, why that period was important is because it gave me the opportunity to discuss the AIDS crisis and how that affected, in particular, the performing arts world. Yeah, and it does parallel a little bit. That's not really the main thrust of the story, but the toward the end of the book, you're in the beginning of 2020, which, as all of us who we can all remember what happened in the beginning of 2020 with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So there is a little bit of that parallel, although like I said, it's not the main focus. But it was interesting how that came together, because it, as you may suspect, I wrote the majority of the novel before COVID existed, and so that parallel was very organic as I rewrote the ending to bring it up to date with what was happening.
It was very strange, I will say, it has been a couple of years, and in some ways it feels like it's longer, and in some ways it doesn't feel like it's been a few years since it started. So it was very weird to kind of read and go back to those first couple of months of the pandemic and people's attitudes and thoughts, and it's not going to last long. And it was part of my brain was almost like too soon.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I wrote those final chapters literally as events were happening in March of 2020, which I don't think I could have captured that mood of that we all felt if I'd written it looking back after we knew
what was going to transpire. That it was such a unique experience as a writer to be in the moment writing, events that were literally happening right now.
Yes. And there will be more and more stories that have that setting and that time period in them, but it will be, yeah, you're right. It'll be a different look as we kind of are coming at it from a different place.
Yeah.
So what was your initial inspiration for the book?
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm a musician and a dancer myself. And so that really, I brought a lot of my own experiences to this story. And though I live in Seattle now and have from, pretty much most of my adult life, I did live in New York City for about a year and a half and danced in a couple of off-Broadway shows when I was there. And so that was really the inspiration of wanting to bring this world onto the page and give sort of that glimpse behind the curtain that I've experienced doing some shows myself, to show the readers that side of things.
So we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, more with Gregory. We'll be talking a little bit about the differences and similarities between performing in Seattle and performing in New York. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Gregory Erich Phillips about his book, A Season in Lights. Let's go ahead and return to that interview.
I can only imagine that it's a very different between Seattle and New York. They both have such different personalities, and being in the arts scenes in each of those places must be an interesting experience.
It is, but as different as the two cities are, once you're in the arts scene and the dance world, the sort of the cabaret show world, it's very similar, and the personalities are that you encounter are going to be very similar across on the opposite sides of the country.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I found more commonality between the two cities in the theater, perhaps, than I did out on the street.
Right. Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about Cammie and Tom? The stories are told from their perspectives in their different time periods, but they do, like you said, come together. Can you talk about what about those characters do you think might resonate with readers?
Sure. So they're very different characters, and they were both in their own way really felt rewarding to write. Cammie she's the dancer. She's in her mid-30s, so she's coming to New York at an age where, for dancers, she's already by many considered over the hill. She's struggling to keep up with the world that is just, they just replace people every few years, and so but I think that will resonate with a lot of people who are maybe following their dreams a little bit later in life than they thought, or trying to keep up with the times when the world is telling you you're too old for this. She also, what I like about Cammie is that she really grew as a character, not only through the book, but from draft to draft as I wrote her. I felt like she deepened as a character, and she had to confront a lot of her personal demons, some family drama that some family guilt that she was struggling with, depression, the imposter syndrome of, do I really belong here? And working through all those things was really gratifying to write. And I think a lot of readers will and have really resonated with her. Excuse me. Tom is a very different character, because when we first meet Tom, it's present day, and he is in his I think he's in his early 50s, if I remember correctly. And he's very secure in himself, whereas Cammie is kind of struggling with herself. And so he gives her sort of this solid, seemingly solid foundation of, this is who he is. He's confident. He's been through it. He's lived these experiences. But later in the book, and partly through seeing him as a young man, and then toward the end, we realize that a lot of that is a facade for him, that that foundation that he seems to have is a little shakier than he portrayed.
And you mentioned Cammie's character and how it changed throughout the writing. When you start writing, do you have a pretty solid foundation of your characters in your mind, or do you like to have them grow more organically during the writing process? How does that work for you?
They definitely grow organically, and the story grows with them, because once you as the writer begin to know the character more, they'll take the story in directions that you might not have expected. And with these two characters, it's interesting you asked that question, because Tom was probably the most fully formed, or one of the most fully formed characters I've had when I started the book. And I was pretty sure of what he was going to be like, and he stayed pretty close to that throughout the writing. Whereas Cammie, she changed so much, like I said, not only as I wrote the book, but from draft to draft. And then the story went with her, because once she reveals herself to you as the writer, you have to be true to her and true to the characters and what they would do. And sometimes they make poor decisions, and you go with them, and that's the direction the story then will take. So I definitely like to let the characters grow, let the characters develop organically.
Mm-hmm. And how about research? Obviously, you drew from some of your own experiences, but what kinds of research did you do as well for the book?
Great question. A lot of it was talking to people who've been in those similar experiences, especially for the section of the 1980s, who were living and working in the arts in New York City at that time. And some of that, I was able to get some details that I never could have found just from, reading online or whatever. Like there was one scene where there was a dance class, and somebody that I talked to, who was a former dancer with New York City Ballet, said, oh, they wouldn't have done the dance class at that studio in that year. They would have done it at this other studio. Tiny little detail, but great flavor to be able to make it more accurate. Also, I had a lot of just readers from different backgrounds than me read the book and give me feedback on the lived experiences that I was missing. For example, there's several gay characters who were there at the time that that AIDS was breaking out in New York, and I had a couple of friends read it who were there at the time, gay men dancers who gave me some real good perspective on what it felt like to be in that world when AIDS is ravaging the community and nobody knew what was happening. One of the primary characters, Tom, is also Black. And so I had a couple of Black friends read it and just give me, some feedback on, was I true to his experience in that? Also, although I've danced in quite a few different capacities, I'm not a professionally trained ballet dancer. And so I had a friend who is read it and give me some details on the ballet scenes, just to make that a little bit more accurate than I could have done myself.
And I think it's interesting for people to read about this world because, you know, you probably have maybe an image in your head of what it would be like to dance on Broadway or to play at Carnegie Hall. And these are things that are discussed throughout the book. But while you might have some idea of the hard work that goes into that, I don't know that everybody maybe thinks of just the day-to-day mundane details that go into those, you know, the classes and everything. And so that was interesting to read, especially with Charles's character. He teaches ballet, and just I never really thought about those classes and the fact that anybody can take them. I hadn't really thought about that before. I just figured they were, you know, professional or not, maybe not even professional dancers, but dancers who were working toward being on Broadway or off Broadway. I didn't realize that tourists also took them. Yeah.
And and that happens in Seattle too, at the Seattle Ballet Company, although they haven't resumed that since the pandemic, but just drop in classes. You drop in adult or kids classes, which I think is fantastic, especially, you know, in New York City where there is so much tourism, to give somebody that experience of feeling like you're in that world when you can't do it 100%. Yeah, I actually found that part, it's not a huge part of the book, but I still found it really interesting. Something else that I was thinking about as you were talking, you know, we mentioned in some ways talking about beginning of the pandemic and coronavirus felt a little too soon. It was also interesting to go back because I was in elementary school when AIDS was first becoming known, and how scary that was and how little was known about it. So it was really interesting to kind of relive that, but as an adult. So, and I mean, I grew up in a very rural area. So thinking about it in terms of in an urban area like New York was also interesting.
Time for our second break of the podcast. When we come back, Gregory will be talking about what he is working on currently. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview about the book A Season in Lights with author Gregory Erich Phillips. Let's return to that interview.
Are you working on anything new now?
Well, that's a tricky question to answer because I'll be just completely honest. I have been, but I'm not sure that it's up to the quality that I am ready to have it published yet. And so I'm thinking through whether there's some fixes I can do or whether I should start something different. I feel like I'm really, really pleased with A Season in Lights. And I felt like I don't want to publish something else that's not quite as good. So nothing immediately in the future yet, but I am always writing. So eventually there will be, something else, but I'm not quite sure what it's going to be yet.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other writings that you would like to highlight?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my first novel was called Love of Finished Years. And it was a little different than my other two, because it's a historical novel set around the time of World War I. And it was kind of the novel that broke me, into the publishing world. It won a major award when it was still just a manuscript, and that kind of opened the door. Then my second novel is called The Exile, and it's another mostly contemporary novel that is about a Hispanic American immigrant and her family facing a deportation crisis. It's also a love story, and it also deals with the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. But similar to what I did with A Season of Lights, in The Exile, I wanted to show that world from the perspective, not of the big Wall Street bankers or anything like that, but of low-level people working in the mortgage business when the housing crisis happened and how it affected those people. So I feel like that one is, in many ways, has some similarities to A Season of Lights, even though very different subject matter, but similar type of story. And all three of the novels have been very well received. They've all three won at least one major award. So it's been a gratifying few years.
That's wonderful. And congratulations on the awards. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Obviously, you are an artist in a variety of ways, musician, dancer, writer. Is writing something that you've always wanted to do, or did you come to that? What was your path to deciding to write for publication?
I've always wanted to be a writer. I wrote my first novel actually when I was 14. It was terrible, but I did it. And what I often say about that is, when you're that young, you don't realize that it's supposed to be hard. You just think, oh, I have a story, I'm gonna write this. And I sat down and over the course of however long it took I wrote a novel. And so as I've gotten older, I haven't had that mental block of thinking, oh, it's so hard to finish a novel, because I had already done that again before I knew better. But it took many, many years, I think, for my writing to get to the point that it was worthy of being published. So even though it was, I wrote a handful of novels that, will probably never see the light of day. It was good practice. And then finally, with Love of Finished Years, it was like, okay, yes, this is now at a level to go out into the world. The winning that contest sort of validated it. And so, yeah, writing is something I've been doing my whole life.
From your own experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Yeah, I would just say a couple of things. Be patient with yourself as far as, if it does feel intimidating to write a whole novel, you don't have to do it like everybody else does. Some people write really fast. Some people write every day. I'm not like that. For me, I have to have the inspiration. I have to, have the right mindset. And so sometimes there will be, a few weeks go by when I don't write anything, and then I write a whole bunch with in a burst. So just be patient with yourself and, embrace your own style. And then the second piece of advice I would say is, if you're an aspiring writer, then you are a storyteller at heart. And so approach it as you're telling a story, and everything else can come later as far as your perfecting your writing craft, editorial, all of that stuff. But if you have a story worth telling, just tell it. and let the rest fall into place.
That's interesting. It made me think, and this is only sort of a half-formed question, but I feel like writing, dancing, playing music, or performing, all are forms of storytelling. Do you feel like you come at them all from kind of that same perspective?
Absolutely. When I choreograph a dance, it's always a story, and I think that the two art forms absolutely complement each other. Music, I play music. I don't compose music, but I would think musical composition is a story as well. Visual arts can be a story as well. I don't really do them, but photography, you're telling a story, or painting, you're telling a story. Any form of art is storytelling to me.
Time for the final break of the podcast, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Social Media Podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author.
When you take time to read for yourself, do you have favorite authors and genres that you turn to?
Yes. So I would say I primarily like more, I hesitate sometimes to use the word literary fiction because it can imply something different, but I really like, fiction that has some real depth to it. I don't really read genre fiction much. So a few authors that I really like, Marilyn Robinson, Jeanette Winterson, let's see, who else? Andre Aciman. I also really like the early 20th century American writers, Steinbeck, Hemingway, Gertrude Stein. That I really connect with that whole era of writing. I think there's some fantastic literature written around that time.
Yeah, actually, I can kind of see maybe a little bit of that influence in not even, again, half-formed question, but just kind of the style
there is some
that you write in, because it tells story, kind of a gritty is not the word I'm looking for, but kind of just this sort of down-to-earth, day-to-day story, but in a larger context.
Well, I would say that is definitely some influence from Steinbeck, who is an author that I've not only read probably all of his books, but studied it. And in fact, the original idea for A Season in Lights, it expanded quite a bit from the original idea. But my original idea was that I was going to write the whole thing around that one weekend show. For those of you who haven't read it yet, the opening act of A Season in Lights, it's written in 3 acts or parts. And Act 1 is about this off-Broadway show, and which is only on over one weekend. And then there's flashbacks and things like that tie into it. And the germ of that idea was partly inspired by Steinbeck's novel, The Wayward Bus, which is basically a novel that encompasses one day and these random characters thrown together on this bus trip in California, and everything that goes wrong. And then there's flashbacks on what these into these characters' lives. And I just loved that idea. So it's interesting that you mentioned that because yeah, I would say that Steinbeck had an influence directly on the way I wrote this novel.
Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about the scene. She's talking about, Cammie is talking about that play in the early part of the book, and I was kind of smiling, kind of struck by one part where her character enters through the audience, and in order to do so, she has to leave the theater, go down an alley, skirt around trash. Like, it's really kind of gross, right? It's not glamorous.
Yep, and that's real. Yeah, I've been in theaters like that.
Yeah. And it's probably one of those details that people don't often think about. You got to put your flip-flops on, go down the alley.
Yep.
Let's talk about your social media or your internet presence, website. Sure. If you can tell people website and what social media you're active on.
Yes. So my full name is Gregory Erich Phillips, and Erich is spelled Erich. So my website and social media is all Gregory Erich Phillips. My website is gregoryerichphillips.com. That's my handle on Facebook, on Instagram. Facebook and Instagram are where I'm, pretty much active in social media. So it's easy to find as long as you spell my middle name correctly.
Yes, which I kept spelling wrong because my brother is Erich without the H.
Oh, yes. So yeah.
It's my name has an H, his name does not. So, it's the wrong place.
Well, my first middle and last names are all fairly common. So as a writer, it helps to differentiate myself by having that slightly different spelling.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, we have talked about a variety of different things during our time together, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to highlight or mention at this time?
Not particularly. I think it's been a good introduction to me and my novel. And, I hope if anybody is listening that they'll, feel that this is something that they'd enjoy reading. If you do read it and enjoy it, please reach out and let me know how you liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me, not only about the book, but about writing and a few other things. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it.
Thank you once again to Gregory for joining me to talk about A Season in Lights. Again, if you are a fan of Broadway, maybe, or if you are a fan of the stories told in parallel timelines, if you're a fan of character-driven stories, there's a lot of things to recommend this book, as you I'm sure heard through the interview. So you should definitely check it out and learn more about New York and Broadway, especially New York at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought that was really interesting, even though, like I said in the interview, it felt a little too soon to be going back there. It was really strange to be looking back on what sometimes feels like a million years ago and sometimes feels like just yesterday. So definitely check out this book, check out the other books by Gregory, and just see what you think, and maybe you find yourself a new book and a new author to read, or if you're already a fan, then you already know. I hope you will join me for the next episode when I'll be speaking with author Timothy Miller about his mystery, The Strange Case of the Dutch Painter. It is Sherlock Holmes. It is Van Gogh. I'm going to leave it at that, and maybe that intrigues you. But join me for the next episode when I'm speaking with Timothy Miller about that book. If you're a fan of this podcast, as always, please do me the favor of all those good things: liking, subscribing, following, writing, or leaving a starred review. Everything helps us to get the podcast out to more listeners. And if you aren't doing so already, please follow on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Love to hear from listeners. Hit me up. Tell me what you're reading. Tell me what you want to read. Tell me if you have a summer reading list. I'd love to hear all of these things. Just find me on social media and tell me what's going on with you. I hope that you are having a wonderful week so far, and I hope you're not having any technical difficulties. But if you are, I hope you can take a break from those technical difficulties and find lots of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.